I'd like to read from Rays of the One Light on the Redeeming Light. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The book of Isaiah in the Bible, chapter 9, tells us, "The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined." What is that light of which so many scriptures speak? In Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, we read of an early experience the Master had with that light. I quote, "I was blessed about the age of 8 with a wonderful healing through the photograph of Lahiri Mahashai. This experience gave intensification to my divine love. While at our family estate in Ichapur, Bengal, I was stricken with Asiatic cholera. My life was despaired of. The doctors could do nothing. At my bedside, Mother frantically motioned to me to look at Lahiri Mahashai's picture on the wall above my head. Bow to him mentally. She knew I was too feeble even to lift my hands in salutation. If you really show your devotion and inwardly kneel before him, your life will be spared." I gazed at his photograph and saw there a blinding light enveloping my body and the entire room. My nausea and other uncontrollable symptoms disappeared. I was well. At once I felt strong enough to bend over and touch Mother's feet in appreciation of her immeasurable faith in her Guru. Mother pressed her head repeatedly against the little picture. "O omnipresent Master, I thank thee that thy light hath healed my son." I realized that she too had witnessed the luminous blaze through which I had instantly recovered from an unusually fatal disease. Where my light is, God once told a saint whom the divine light had healed, no darkness can dwell. The divine light, pure, calm, liberating, is the only final cure for every kind of delusion, ill health, emotional grief, and spiritual ignorance. Seek it daily in the silence, in deep meditation. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 5th chapter, "For whom that darkness of the soul is chased by light, splendid and clear shines manifest the truth, as if a sun of wisdom sprang to shed its beams of light." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. That's the Spirit. Thank you. One time, one of the members from our centers in Mexico when I was in SRF told me that he was reading the autobiography of a yogi for the first time. And he came upon that section where it says that if anyone think of Babaji with devotion, he will receive an instantaneous blessing. He told me that he was so moved by the book, he thought, well, if this is true, I must know it now. And he closed the book and he prayed to Babaji, and suddenly the whole room was filled with light. Through these great masters, a light has come into the world. But the light of truth is something very real. It's something inside you. I was telling a group of people at Ananda village quite recently that when we wanted to build our temple in Assisi, which is similar to what we're going to be doing here in Italy, the people went to Murano, where they make beautiful glass, and asked them if they could replicate an image of the spiritual eye, which is what is beheld in deep meditation. And the man there, who was just a regular worldly person, so it seemed, a businessman, when he saw this design, he said, "Oh, what is that light? I've been seeing it for years. And now it's the first time I've seen anybody capture it like this." So we found the right person to do that, that image. But so many people have told me that they had seen this light without ever knowing what it was. And when they heard it described, they said, "That's exactly what I have seen." Not everybody sees the light, but it does happen in meditation, even when you're not expecting it. I remember when I was a little child, at night, I would look and suddenly I'd see this light and I'd feel myself expanding with this light. And then at the age of 9, I got a very high fever and came close to dying. And I began in my mind to associate the delirium of a high fever with this strange consciousness which I had had when my consciousness expanded, and I was afraid maybe the two were the same, and I began to withdraw from that. I was afraid of it. And it wasn't until many years later when I came on the spiritual path and I began to feel that in meditation the consciousness does expand, and there is this inner light that you behold when the mind is calm. Now this is a mystical experience. It's not something everybody has, and it's something you can look forward to. It's the calm, liberating spiritual eye, the divine light that is within you. Each one of you in this room has that light. In fact, it's a curious thing. I'm remembering one time out at Yogananda's desert retreat, there was a dog that a neighbor had. His name was Bojo. And we were having lunch outside, and the dog smelled this thing, and he came over sniffing. And Yogananda said, "Look at him. He's so concentrated, his whole mind is on the spiritual eye." And it's true, he had his forehead wrinkled. So even dogs, all beings have this light, because everything is made of light, as we know from the findings of science. In fact, the material world is really only a manifestation of energy and, in fact, of light. Now, I want to bring this down, however, to a lower manifestation of that light, because in this world, there is a constant battle between darkness and light. And most people don't realize that they're in darkness, which this world is. They see the sunlight, they turn the lights on in the room, and the light comes on. But there's a subtler light than that, which makes this light seem dark. That is what is meant in the Bhagavad Gita, when it says to the world, what is day to the worldly person is night to the yogi. There's several, and what is day to the yogi is night to the worldly person. There are several interpretations of that statement, but the deeper and more important one is that the worldly person sees only darkness where there is real light. And what to him is light is really a relatively dark thing. We need to understand, however, that light manifests in this world on various levels. And so we, all of us, all over the world, the symbol for the light of understanding, for seeing things more clearly, is light. And I don't suppose anywhere in the world do they not use darkness as a symbol for nescience, unawareness, dullness. And you can see, even though you may not be able to see the light in people, you can see that there's something coming on. Jesus put it beautifully when he said, let the dead bury their dead. He was essentially saying that even people who think they're alive are mostly dead. Just a question of time for the undertaker to find out. Because if you look at the eyes of so many people, you don't see life there. You may see meat and potatoes, but you don't see light. Whereas some people have a light. You look in their faces, and there's something there. And I think the usual symbol even for what you see in the sense of clarity and understanding is light. Now, I've written 2 books lately, and to me they're extremely important for what we're doing. One of them is the book that we've been talking about this weekend. It's the book, God is for Everyone. And I wrote it, yes, but I really ghost wrote it because it was all Yogananda's teachings. And it's a rewrite of his book, The Science of Religion. Now this book tells you how God is for everyone. That is to say, everybody is seeking God without knowing it. Everybody is looking for something. And if you were to get down beneath all the different layers of their own definitions of what they're looking for, like I hope that the Esso stock goes up or something like that, what they really want to get away from is unhappiness. And what they all want to find is not only a cessation of sorrow and suffering and unhappiness, they want happiness. And behind that happiness, because happiness too is a state that could finally become boring, but there's something behind that happiness that you want, that is joy, that never ends. And this is what all people are seeking. Now, we don't know that the joy we're looking for is bliss, but the nature of God is bliss. When we think of people, there was a story Master used to enjoy. A couple of friends died. One of them went to the right place and the other one to the, let's say, wrong place. So this friend of his down below, the friend of the guy up in heaven, phoned him one day and said, well, how's it going up there? What's up? What do you all do? And the guy in heaven said, well, we have a wonderful life. I mean, it's just great. In the morning we chant, we pray, we meditate. The guy down there said, oh, well, and what do you do in the afternoon? Well, we chant and pray and meditate. And the guy said, well, for God's sakes, and what do you do in the evening? Well, for a change, we meditate, and then we chant, and then we pray. And the guy in hell said, oh, you ought to come down here. We have a lot of fun. And a lot of people think that fun means diversity. And a lot of people think that heaven means boredom. They imagine spending all eternity sort of strumming harps. I can't imagine anything more boring. But heaven is something that people, nobody's ever called down and said, I wish I could get down there. There's something to it that's much deeper. There's a joy. Joy comes from your own nature. And the more you have joy, listen, you could go in the worst place in the world and find, if you're happy inside, you love it. A friend of mine told me she went to a concert at Yellowstone Park one time, and she had been feeling ecstasy because of deep meditations. And she was herself musical. And so she said afterwards, wasn't that the most heavenly music? And this friend of hers said, well, what are you talking about? That boy didn't even play in tune. But she was filled with joy, so much joy that everything just seemed beautiful. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily the right attitude. We should have some discrimination. But the point is that when you have joy, you can enjoy everything. And when you don't have joy, you can't enjoy anything. You look at the most beautiful painting, so another painting. Listen to the most beautiful music and sort of look at your watch and see when it's time to get home. Joy is something inside, and when you've got it, heaven is very diversified. But the joy is the important part of it. Without that, it wouldn't even have much beauty. I was in the countryside one time, just enjoying the lovely greenery and streams and plants and flowers and Somebody was with me and was saying, I wonder what time it is. We'd better get back for dinner. Well, many people are like that. They can't see things because they're too busy just being themselves. And that, unfortunately, is a boring self. When you are your own highest friend, you're the best friend you can have. When you're your enemy, you're the worst enemy you can have. All your joy, all your sorrow comes from inside. Now, God is for everyone. Explains how everybody in the world is really looking for God and they don't know it. They're really looking for bliss. They're looking for light. They're looking for that which will redeem them from all those things that cause them pain. Not only the boredom, but the suffering, the things that can go wrong in this world, the suffering that people go through. As Krishna says to Arjuna, "Oh, Arjuna, get away from this ocean of suffering and misery." And it is that. And because somehow you've managed to come here and feel pretty well today, I hope, it's hard to imagine, but when it hits you, it does. And this world has lots of pain. And people say, well, why did God make this world? Well, it isn't the way it looks. This is a very different world from what it seems. I think the first thing we need to do is not ask why he did it. That's his business. Our job is, what can we do about it? And that job is to get out of the pain, get out of the suffering of this world. But in the end, I have found, reading the lives of saints, there isn't a single saint, having found God, who says, listen, it's just a waste of time, don't bother. All of them have said that it's worth every penny, every moment of suffering, everything I've ever been through to find this absolute perfection of bliss that never changes, that you can't lose, and that is yet ever new, ever more wonderful. This is your destiny. Why did God make the world the way he did? Well, it's hard to understand when you're right in the middle of it, but I've often thought of a novel. Supposing this novel had been written about a young man who was born on the right side of the tracks, and he grew up wealthy, had the proverbial silver spoon in his mouth, married, he got a job in a good company, married the boss's daughter, everything went beautifully for him, nothing went wrong, no problems, no illnesses, nothing. Wouldn't you probably put that book down about halfway through and say, what a bore. You want a little contrast. But now supposing that same young man had been born on the wrong side of the tracks, and he had a real struggle getting an education, and they couldn't afford electricity. He had, like Abraham Lincoln, just a candlelight to light his book so he could study by, but somehow, with all that work, he managed to become really educated, and he entered the world and got a decent job, just barely paying his way, but decent for him. But bit by bit, because the boss saw he was diligent, he rose and finally became the vice president, finally married the boss's daughter, and all these things finally went right. Wouldn't you say, oh, that was a great book? Same end, for God's sake, but a lot harder getting there. One time I remember this disciple of Yogananda saying this, I have such a longing for God. Why does he hold back? And Yogananda had such a sweet smile when he said, that's what makes it all the sweeter when he does come. The real understanding comes with the denouement. The saints who have found God, all of them looking back, they say, oh, it was worth it. And you may think, gosh, was cancer worth it? What was my losing my only child worth it? Was all the pain and suffering of the concentration camps and everything, was that worth it? When you look close, you don't see that. When you stand back a little bit, yeah, you can. You know, an interesting experience, since I mentioned concentration camps, there was one of the disciples of Yogananda was with him and several others at a theater. And there was a girl about, 3 years old, sitting in front of them. And this disciple couldn't take her eyes off that little girl. And later, Yogananda said, "You were fascinated by her, weren't you?" And the disciple said, "Oh, I was. I don't know what it was, but she really attracted me." Master said in her last life, she died in a concentration camp. And because she thought of other people, not of herself, because she had faith in God and didn't lose it, because she lived, even in those circumstances, the right way, she has been born a saint. So who knows what you've been through? I can say from my little short span of life, which if you were 7 years old, you'd think, short, my God. But at my age, you look back and you think, nothing. I can remember when I was 4 just as well as I can remember yesterday. Nothing, just sort of slipped by. But all the experiences that you've been through, I've been through hard ones. Somebody said to me once when they heard my songs, "Well, you can write happy songs, you've never suffered." I said, it's because I've suffered that I've earned the right to write happy songs. Certainly I've suffered. I don't think of it as suffering. I think of it as a learning experience. I'm grateful. Honestly, as I look back at my life and see the various pains I have gone through that have wrenched my heart to the point where I just wondered if I could live through them. And I'm no different from other people. But I look back and I say, thank God. I feel that that made me a man. That made me grow up. That made me understand. That freed me from a burden. Because once I've come through those things, I felt lighter. All the hard experiences of life are there, first of all, because we brought them on ourselves. Secondly, because they're the game anyway. That's the way of life. But you know, you reach the point where it just doesn't touch you anymore. And when things go the way they do go in this world, you cease to get excited about it. You say, oh, well, so another test. It doesn't matter. And when the more you become advanced in God, the more you begin to see that it's all a dream. It doesn't matter. And when you wake up in Him, then you realize. I remember Master was talking about, he said, first of all, he was talking about the different masters that he met in Autobiography of a Yogi. Now this will shock you. He said that very few had attained final liberation. And I started asking him about this one and that one. He said, no, not yet. Some of the best known saints in our age, no, not yet. He said the only ones who were completely free were Babaji, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Kriyananda. He didn't refer to himself at that time, but he said it on other occasions that he had become freed many lifetimes ago. And then 2 disciples of Lahiri Mahashai, Ananda, the saint with 2 bodies, you know that story, and Ram Gopal Majumdar, the sleepless saint, but none of the others. Then he told me about, I asked him about Ramana Maharshi, and he said, not yet. But he said, I met a disciple of his who was completely freed. And I got to spend 4 days with that disciple. It was a wonderful experience. Very inward, very removed from it all. Had a twinkle in his eye, a soft smile, but nothing outward at all. And when I thought of people like Ramana Maharshi was a great saint, I thought, well, how long does it take? He said, it doesn't matter to you. Once you've reached that state of inner freedom, which certainly Ramana Maharshi has reached, you may have past karma to pay off, but you're completely free as far as your present state of consciousness is concerned. You just have a certain amount of karma to pay off from the past. But he said, and this is the point that really interested me, you can use that karma as an excuse to come back to help others. Otherwise, they just don't care, because once there's no ego, once there's a sense of union with the infinite, then whether you come back into this body or not into this body, he said that a very few saints, and Ramakrishna told this beautiful parable about three men who were going out of their village, and they came to a high wall that they'd never passed this way and never seen that wall before. And they thought, well, we just would love to find out what's on the other side of that wall. And so they agreed that if they could somehow help one of them to reach the top, he would tell them what was there. So finally, one of them stood on the shoulders of the other, and he stooped down, and the other climbed up on his shoulders and was able to reach up to the top of the wall and get on top. As soon as he looked on the other side, he let out this glad cry and clapped his hands and jumped down on the other side. And they waited, and they waited, and nothing happened. Finally, they thought, well, what a selfish fellow. And so they decided, well, okay, if I can get up there, I will come and tell you. So they managed to find a log, and he stood on the top of this little stump and managed to get the other guy up there. And as soon as he got to the top of the wall, he clapped his hands. He said, oh, wonderful, and jumped down on the other side. And he didn't come back. And the third one thought, my goodness, I've got to find out what's over there. So he was able to haul a log over and lean it against the wall and somehow climb up this thing to the top of the wall. And when he looked down over the other side, he saw the most beautiful garden he'd ever beheld. He just thought, oh, that's for me, this hot, dusty village. I can leave it behind and just enjoy. And he was about to do it when he thought, but if I jump down, there are all those villagers there who don't know, who won't ever find this place maybe. Let me suspend this pleasure of jumping into that garden and go back and help them. Those are the ones who are the avatars, those who have reached that point of complete freedom, and then with that thought of freedom, with that realization of freedom, there's nothing that brings them back. There's still one desire that brings them back, a desire to share, compassion for other people, a wish that other people also enjoy. Such are the Ramakrishnas, such are the Yoganandas, the Lahiri Mahashayas, the Sri Yukteswaras. Not many reach that level. Once they do, once they're out of it, they think, oh boy. But a few have that compassion. You know, when I hear stories about Yogananda's stern discipline, like the younger brother of Dayamata in SRF, whose name was Dale, and he was young and he didn't understand, and Master tried to sort of teach him spiritually, and he would just say to his mother, Mommy, he's scolding me. Finally, Master just thought, well, what's the use? And he gave him a model airplane, and oh, this boy was so excited by this model airplane, and went on and became an airplane engineer and enjoyed his little life as an airplane engineer, but he didn't find any bliss inwardly. This is, however, what many people saw Yogananda or other great masters as. They saw their sternness sometimes, but they weren't being stern because you were offending them. They were being stern for yourself. They were saying, wake up. You've got to understand there's more to it than this. But he was not stern, really. I would look into his eyes. I would see such love, such compassion. I felt sorry for him if he had to scold me, because I knew it wasn't what he wanted to do, but it was something, as you do if you've got your little child on the curb of a street and he starts running out into the traffic. You're not going to say, now, Johnny, come back. You might get killed. You're going to be a little more firm than that, aren't you? But it isn't because you don't like it when he goes into traffic. It's because you want to save his life. And the masters are interested in saving our spiritual lives. So sometimes they are firm. Sometimes they seem austere, but they really have come back for only one reason, out of compassion, out of desire to help. Now this is the light that they bring, and it's the light of a great teaching. It's a light that can help everybody on every walk of life to understand who they are and why they're here and what they're really looking for, so that it isn't as if everybody had to leave everything and go off to the Himalayas. Wherever you are, you can find God. God has put you there for a reason, but you must seek Him and not leave Him out of the equation. And the marvelous thing is that when you bring Him into the equation, somehow everything goes right. And when you forget to, nothing seems to go right. It's like that marvelous story of Krishna. When he was a little boy, his foster mother, Yashoda, was making cheese, fresh cheese. And Krishna was a little boy and mischievous and kept pestering her, so she decided that she had to tie him up so she could get busy with her cooking. And she got a piece of string, which seemed quite long enough, to tie him to a bedpost. It was this much short. She thought, well, I thought I had measured it. All right, so she went and got a lot more string and tied it, and again it was this much short. And she did it 2 or 3 times, and it still remained that short. Suddenly she realized, well, I've been treating this little baby boy as just a baby, but he's really the Lord Himself in this form. And she knew that. She sort of lost sight of it. But this is a symbol. And whether the story really happened or not, we don't know. Most of those stories are really allegories. The allegory in this case is that no matter what you try to, that has different meanings, but in your life, to get everything together, if you leave God out of the equation, that string will be just that much short. No matter how rich you become, you can die of cancer, no problem. Satan, Mara, death, they can come in wherever you are, no problem. There's always a hole in the wall for the mice to get in. No, when you understand that you're doing it for God, you don't have to do much, and suddenly everything seems to go right. I had this incredible experience years ago. I felt inspired to go back to India. And I had earned a little money from classes, and I figured I had enough money to get me there and stay for a couple of months and come back. Well, just a week before I was to leave for India, the rod on my car went out, and I realized that I would have to get rid of that car and get a new one. And I thought, well, what am I to do? I had the alternative of buying a new car and not having the money to go to India, or buying a new car and deciding that, well, Divine Mother will just have to give me another chance somehow. But I figured that I felt the Divine Mother wanted me to go back. And so I said, well, Divine Mother, I do feel that you want me to go back. I know that common sense tells me I need a car. I live up there in the mountains. I can't live there without a car. And so you have to help me out. I said, I'm going to put the money in on a good used car, but you're going to have to reimburse me if you want me to go. Very simple. And I said it quite simply. I felt no great, I had prayed to God, but we were in restaurants and trying to decide whether God wanted me or didn't want me to sell the car and go to India or whatever. And I just used my common sense. So I said, I don't feel any inspiration this moment, but my common sense tells me I have to have a car. If you agree, get me a car, okay. And so I bought this car. It cost me $1,100, a good used car at that time. This was 1972. And having that, I didn't have the money to get to India, but I just figured it would have to come. Well, you know, this was Friday night. And Monday morning, the following Monday morning, I got a letter in the mail from somebody I didn't know with a check for $1,000, not to Ananda, to me. And he said, use this as Divine Mother wants you. How many people in this country would write a check to somebody that I don't know, he probably didn't know me, and say that Divine Mother wants it. To me, that was a marvelous experience. And in fact, he had just been, he'd come out of the army from the Vietnam War, and he had this extra money, and he wanted to do something for God, and he just felt the inspiration, he should send me this $1,000. But it was just what I needed, and I was able to go and come back. Now, one experience like that, you think, well, nice coincidence. But they start piling up, and you begin to say, wait a minute, there's something happening here. You will see, and it works, that if you really give your life to God and do things for God and do things with God, you'll be amazed. You see, he's not up there in the clouds telling you, go right, go left. No, he's not doing these things. But if you do it and open yourself to him, somehow things work out. That's the beautiful allegory in the story of the Mahabharata, when the Duryodhana, who was representing the force of evil, and Arjuna, who was representing the force of good, and they both went to Krishna, who was considered an incarnation of God. And Krishna was sleeping, and Arjuna was at his head, Duryodhana was at his feet, as I recall the story, I'm not sure. And when Krishna woke up, they both wanted to present their petition. And Krishna gave them a choice. He said, you can have my whole army, 1 million or more soldiers, or you can have me, but I won't take part in the conflict. I'll just be with you. And Duryodhana was delighted to get these 1 million soldiers. And Arjuna was very pleased because he knew where the Lord was, their defeat was not possible. And so he very gladly accepted that Krishna would be his charioteer. And because Krishna was there, somehow things went right. That's how you'll see it happens. Somehow things will go right if you live for God, if you give things to him, if you remember that you're doing everything for his bliss, if you're doing it to serve him. Now, there's another point that I wanted to bring up today, and a very important one to me. Another book that I wrote that I just finished, and it just came out back in March, called Hope for a Better World. This was based on a book, not based on a book, inspired by a book called Books That Change the World. And it's a book that sort of represents, you might say, the big guns of Western thought, starting with Plato and Machiavelli and Hegel and Darwin and Freud and all these people that in Western thought have given, and most of you have been through this kind of education, where you see that the modern system of thinking is that basically there are no real values. There is no God, there is no truth, there is no this thing and that thing, and some people leave college feeling very discouraged. But there's another side to it too. When I read those different excerpts from them, because I never was interested in those authors really, I was amazed to see that they'd missed the point, each one of them. One of the basic things they never asked themselves was, does it work? Plato's a perfect example. He wrote this thing, The Republic. You've all heard of it. You've probably read it. And in this, he gives the ideal society. Well, quite frankly, it's the most horrible, grotesque view of what society could be. But quite apart from that, you know, you're not supposed to say these things. He was Plato. Okay, well, I'll tell you why I dare say it. It's not my opinion. The king of Syracuse in Sicily invited him to practice, to put this thing into effect, his ideas of a republic, to put it into a community. And he did, and it was a complete disaster. Well, it didn't work. That's the question they haven't asked themselves. Machiavelli came up with this grotesque idea of how to rule a state. And people like Hitler and Mussolini and Napoleon and Cromwell and other great dictators followed. Hitler kept a book of Machiavelli's Il Principe, the Prince, by his bedside. Napoleon, that book was found in his chariot at Waterloo. They all used Machiavelli as their model, and it worked for a while. By complete ruthlessness, they were able to hold their position at the top of the dung heap. But in the end, every one of them fell. And if you look at the philosophy of Machiavelli, it can't work. If your ideal is to have nothing but competitors, you'll have out of 1,000 people, 999 enemies. If you can have friends, you'll have 999 friends. We at Ananda are proving that. Because we make friends wherever we go, we find people want to work with us. And that attitude is something you could project. Years ago, my parents who were living at that time in France, my father was, most of his adult life, he was posted abroad as an oil geologist. And he invited me to France. And I was at the airline counter in New York, ready to fly over. And the man in front of me had too much baggage. And the man was saying, "I'm sorry, we're going to have to charge you excess baggage." And he got all hot under the collar and furious and said, "I want to talk to the manager and I'll never fly Pan Am again," and this thing and that thing. And the more he spoke, the more they were just adamant. So I was quite worried. I had a lot more than he had. I had a harmonium and this thing and that thing. I hope to go and talk to our different centers in Europe. And so I prayed, and I prayed to Divine Mother. And when I came up to the desk, I looked at him and I said, "Well, Divine Mother, you're working through him." You know, he looked at me and said, "Oh, well, what have we got here?" "Oh, yeah, okay." Checked me right through. I've seen that happen so many times. That when you see God everywhere, when you do things with God, when you see people with God, that's what we do as a community. And we find that things do work. They don't always work easily because God has to test you so you become strong. But they do work. Now, again and again in this book, I saw that they were presenting theories that didn't work. And when you come up to modern times where you've got Karl Marx launching, through Lenin, a system that required millions of people to be killed so that their system could be proved right. I mean, what kind of a sick philosophy is that? Do you know that the Chinese and the Russian communists together have killed approximately 100 million of their own people just to be right? That's no way to start a new movement. But I do believe that something is needed. And this is what I've been wanting to say, that we're living in an age when some new approach to life is needed. We're teetering on the brink of a new age. We're in a new age where people have to start thinking differently. We can't have the same old tribal warfare and rivalry that we had back in days when people fought with spears. You can't think that way anymore. You can't think that, as they're doing in Africa still, the clannish idea that my particular tribe alone must conquer. We've got to think of other people. The world's getting too small. And a new system is needed. But the trouble is that everybody keeps thinking of doing it en masse. How do you know if it works en masse? How do you know if you impose something on everybody that everybody wants it? And if they don't want it, what's the answer? Kill them? That's no solution. The simplest solution of all is that if you have a good thing, do it. And if people see it's a good thing, they'll say, "Hey, that's a good thing," and they'll do it. Do it yourself. You don't have to tell other people how they should behave. I get fed up with these peace marches. I don't mind a peace march. I'm all for peace. What I don't like is them marching in the name of peace with such anger. You should be like me. Well, I don't want to be like you. I'm sorry. I'd rather be peaceful than talk about peace. And so what I think is needed is a group of people, because one person usually doesn't have much of an impact. Yes, he can have some. But you know, if all the members of Ananda community were to move away and each one settle in a different city, because this was our idea, that we want to spread this teaching around, we wouldn't have much of an impact. You'd have somebody in an office who was smiling and peaceful, even with all the inter-office rivalries and so on, and somebody might notice it and come to that person and say, gee, what makes you so peaceful when we're all getting upset about everything? And he'd say, well, I meditate. Meditate? You probably eat bran for breakfast. They'll come up with some sort of solution that they can relate to something they've done, and they knew that when they ate bran, their digestion was better and they felt better and perhaps a little less irritable. But it's very hard for one person to make a strong impact on more than just a handful of others. It has been known to happen. But when I looked at that movie, The Razor's Edge, and saw that this guy had gone to India and achieved enlightenment, then his solution was to come back and be a cab driver in New York and to inspire people being a cab driver. Now look, here you are sitting in the back of the cab. All you see of a cab driver is the back of his head. What's he going to do? I mean, yes, I know sometimes they get gabby and they tell you a few things. A couple that I know got married because their cab driver said, why don't you get married? So they thought, okay, well, that's sort of a silly... I really don't think that cab drivers can have as much of an impact as one might like to think, but my point is that, okay, so maybe he chose the wrong profession, maybe it was just a novel anyway, but whatever you do, even if it was Jesus Christ as the President of the United States, let's face it, the poor guy wouldn't have much of a chance. 4 years, he'd see all these things he wanted to change, but the bureaucracy, well, he'll be here just 4 years. That's what in baskets are for. And the in basket gets higher and higher. And bureaucrats know perfectly well how to drag their feet. It's very difficult for a president even to make that much of an impact. And everybody blames the poor guy for whatever happens, but he's just a part of the domino effect. He's doing what he's doing because he has to do it. There's already machinery going. I'm in charge of a number of things in this world, not much, but a community. I've retired now, but my voice counts for a little something, I hope. And I know that I can't tell people to do something I want if it isn't what they want to. As a leader, you're bound. You're bound by other people. You can't. You're not free to do it just as you want to. Or you may think you do, but in the end, if you do that, you can be... There are ways of handling that kind of leader too. We find the pages of history littered with assassinations. No, the answer is to draw people because they want to. Now, how are people going to want to? Well, you cannot do it if you have some big system. You've got to do it by example. If a few people, and this is what we're finding at Ananda, people write to us from all over the world, Taiwan and Philippines and Africa and Australia, everywhere. And a comment we get again and again is, my life is more worthwhile just knowing you people are there. It gives people the faith to think, well, maybe people can work together. Maybe they don't have to cut each other's throats to get what they want. Maybe there is something to this cooperation stuff. Maybe there is something to living for God. Listen, I could have that one little experience with a car wanting to go to India, and I can hear many a skeptic saying, oh yeah, well, so coincidence. We dismiss a lot of things, even miracles, as coincidence, or he did it with mirrors. But when you see it happen again and again, not just to one person, but to many people. And when you see other people thinking, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, and they try it, and it works, you begin to see that there's something happening here that's worthwhile. Now, the thing about a community like this, and this is why this book, Hope for a Better World, is so important, because I go through all these, it took a certain amount of guts, I think, to take on these big guns in Western thought. But I didn't take much guts, really, because I could see so clearly that they were barking up the wrong tree, that there is a way out. But that way out always came back to this simple solution of communities. Now, it may seem ridiculous, but I tell you, I'm convinced that 100, 200 years from now, people are going to look back and they'll say that Ananda and communities like it were the most important thing happening today. What we need is small groups of people who believe in an ideal. Most people don't believe in anything. But people who believe in an ideal, getting together and living their ideal, practicing it, not being dogmatic. When you find something doesn't work, okay, change. I'm never fixed on anything except my principles. But how we do things, there are many different ways. But we're here as a great living experiment. 800 to 1,000 people in our different communities are living this way. And they're showing people everywhere that it does work. And more people, without any dogmatizing, Bible pounding or anything, they look around them and they say, well, these people have something that's worthwhile. And they don't have to join the community to be influenced. I think that just a few people, it took only 5,000 people, I'm told, in Russia to bring about that whole Russian Revolution. It takes only 5% of stock ownership in a company to take over the company, because most people cancel each other out. A few people really believing in what they want, believing in what they're doing, can have an impact far in excess of anything that you can possibly think of when you think only numerically. A few people living together rather than in scattered ways, they begin to make an impact. Those thousands, those few people who are living in offices, going out from Ananda, if they were to gather in one place at Ananda, people come and they see them living that way, and they say, this is worthwhile. And they see it happening because so many different types of people come to these communities. And they see that all these people somehow are following principles. It's a great laboratory. Because in practicing these things, you see what works and what doesn't work. We see what works and what doesn't work, and we learn from it. This is the most important experiment that can be done this day and age. Because you're not going to find, I remember a book called Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy, a very interesting book. But it was written, I think many of you must know it, but it was written about this man in Boston back in about 1890, who somehow went to sleep in a cataleptic state or something and was awakened 100 years later. And he saw a completely different society. But I remember the most memorable line to me in that was that he discovered homes had radios. They didn't call them radios because this book was written before that had been discovered, but boxes from which sounds were transmitted from some central place in the city. And they could listen in their own home to the most beautiful selection of music imaginable. And his comment was that, I think that any society that could produce something like this, heaven itself would have arrived. I can't imagine any perfection greater than this. Well, now look, we all can do it. We can turn the radio on and listen to anything you like. And a lot of other things we've got. Have they made us happy? Have they solved all our problems? Science and material progress is not the answer. More and more people have found out that what they really want is something more. And that something more is to get to know who you are. I think we're on the edge of a great depression. I seriously do. I think that many people are going to be suffering greatly. I have to go farther than that. I have to say that we need a Great Depression because people are getting too greedy. People are thinking, I've got it made because I've got all the money I want. But they don't have anything. They don't have happiness. I grew up in a wealthy home with wealthy friends. I didn't see happiness there. I saw compromise. I didn't see happiness. I didn't want anything to do with it. When I was 16, my dad wanted to buy me a tuxedo. I said, Dad, don't get it. I'll never earn enough money to pay income tax. And it's been basically true. I became a monk and I just don't care. But you have it, you know that's not what you want. We have so much that the world would give everything it had to get. And we're not really happy, except to the extent where we've got happiness inside. The greatest thing that we need today is groups of people forming an experiment together, learning how to live together. Not just for security, yes, you'll get that much more. For the thought that in working together we can stand stronger by our ideals, by our principles, and we can have that inner joy that worldly people never seem to find as long as they think their joy will be outside. This is, to me, a very important book because it makes such a strong case for the need for communities today. And do you know, I have not mentioned the name Ananda in this book. I haven't wanted people to think that I'm trying to convert them to Ananda or to my philosophy of life. I'm trying to convince them of an ideal. Whether they join Ananda or not, I don't know what we'd do if we had 5 million Anandites. I think it would be a headache. Let them form their own blasted communities. But I really think that if people could get together, get land, don't live in these squalid cities. Get land close to nature, close to God. Live simple lives. I remember when I was living on $10 a month. Now that sounds impossible. Maybe it is impossible now, I don't know. But people were saying it then too. This was 40 years ago. But I found it was a wonderful adventure, actually. I found that a dessert, all I needed was 1 teaspoon. I didn't have to gobble the whole thing. A nice little sweet taste, that was enough. And I set it in the fridge, and every day I'd take a little dessert. And so I made 1 dessert last for a week. I didn't have to buy bread. I could make chapatis, like tortillas, with flour, which was much cheaper. The morning cereal, oatmeal, was very cheap. I found that there were certain things I could make that were, you could get, for instance, you could sprout wheat and get very good nourishment out of those sprouts. Many things you can do. I did lose a little weight, I grant you, but I really enjoyed it. It was great fun. It was a great adventure. Now, I don't think I'd want to live that way all the time just because it took too much energy, too much concentration on how to save money. But I do say that we don't need thousands and thousands and thousands all the time. We can get along with a lot less, and I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity, really. But you can't do it so easily alone, whereas if you're with other people and you're working together, we're at Ananda where we have nice homes now, but in the beginning, we had teepees, we had trailers, and it was a wonderful way of life. Please keep this in mind. You don't have to come and say, I've got to join Ananda. Get together with some dear friends of yours. Buy some land. Be ready to go there if you have to. Try to, on weekends, go there and develop a little bit. But if you could only plant your own food, if you could only live simply, you would find that there is something of value in learning to work with others, learning to work close to nature, learning to work with God. It's not utopian. It's a reality. We've proved it. We've come all the way up from nothing. We didn't even have outhouses in the beginning. But it can be done when you work together. I don't say do it our way, but this book does urge you to realize that that can be the experiment that the West has been looking for. The West has been looking for a new way of life, a better way of life. This is the way to do it. Don't try to impose huge ideas on huge numbers of people. Don't think everybody's got to do it. Do it as you think is right, with a few people who agree with you. And if others agree, it will spread. They used to laugh at Fulton when he was building the first ship made of steel. But when they saw it floated, then they all wanted it. The Wright brothers, they thought, were fools. A heavier-than-air machine flying? Impossible. All they had to do was set it in motion once. And bit by bit, look at the airplane industry today. You can change the world, but you can't do it by making a lot of noise and marches and telling other people how they should be. Be that yourself. Be that with a few friends. And then understand what you're really looking for. God is for everyone, because God is bliss, and everybody is looking for bliss. So these two books are a two-pronged attack, you might say, on the modern system, and I'm all for it. I've never fought against anything, but I've always fought for things, and I've had to fight hard for that, and I believe in it. I do urge you to read these two books. One of them is out already, the other will be out in a couple of months, but they should change people's lives, because people want that.